Good afternoon, everyone. Art is made to thrill the senses, inspire imaginations, and enthrall our attention. And it also doesn't hurt if you can live, work, and eat in it. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christine GERMANN, and I'm the Programming Manager of City Cultural Events. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to today's Doors Open Insight Speaker Series event entitled Architecture is Art. I want to start by expressing our gratitude to Great Gulf, the presenting sponsor of Doors Open Toronto, and for their generous support. I want to thank our programming partner, the Toronto Society of Architects. As always, our partnership with them continues to flourish as Doors Open celebrates its 17th year. I'd also like to say a special thanks to our host this afternoon, the Aga Khan Museum. I would like to invite you to welcome a man who is perfect representation of today's theme. Through his work entitled The Entire City Project, his unique photography has shaped the way we see Toronto. Michael Awad is an architect and artist who has been commissioned for several public art projects and who has taught for 10 years at the University of Toronto. He has been a visiting scholar at several other Canadian universities as well. We are thrilled to have him here as the moderator of this afternoon's event. Let's give a very warm welcome to Michael Awad.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be I have the pleasure of introducing our panel guests and speakers. I'm going to make a couple of comments about all of them so that I don't have to repeat myself. Everyone on this stage has been published numerous times, and everyone on the stage has won awards. So I just want to get that out there. Award-winning, all of them. Our first speaker, Christine Pearson, is an artist, architect, and teacher. She's a founding member of an organization in Toronto called the Waves Collective and a journal called Scapegoat. Since 1995, she has produced over a dozen significant public events and installations around Toronto. The smallest one being let's call it a children's performance piece in a wading pool that involved blowing of bubbles, and the largest one, which involved tens of many performers and was orchestrated on Sunnyside Beach in the Sunnyside Pool Pavilion. So there's a huge range of work here over the past 10 years. So if you can please welcome Christine.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming out. I'm going to be looking at a monitor to see the slide at the same time, so forgive me if I'm not always looking at you, I'm checking in on the images. Are we starting with images now? Yeah. Okay, great. This is rapid fire. I'm showing a picture of Alan Capro's yard from 1967 at the Pasadena Art Museum version, and to comment on the influence of Dewey's seminal book, Art as Experience, on Capro, and that's also an influence on me, to focus on the experiential of art and architecture and city making, and questions of the art and life distinction, and for me to focus on creating events that activate latent forms of the social, this being one at Days of Action 1996 with the October Group, critical of the Harris government. And this action focused on the use of architecture, space in the city, in the same way that Anna Halprin's 1978 City Dance series in San Francisco did, where she collaborated with her partner Lawrence Halprin, landscape architect. And it inspired this making of celebration within the city, activating the city. Here's Guy Debord's 1957 The Naked City, with a nod to psychogeography's efforts to engage the body, desire, feeling, memory, all these parts of experience, and especially the situationists' love for playing with architecture and space, and giving a kind of poetry to daily life. This is the Wade, one of the Wade projects, conceived with Sandra Rechico for a number of years, creating installation and performance art in Toronto's wading pools. and seeing these disparate fragments around the city, tiny parks, the waiting pools, bringing out a kind of latent network of play spaces and potential art spaces. This is Marcia Hoyer's piece from 2006, very playful sculpture that everybody of all ages can engage with. And really, intention is to inspire others to look upon our public spaces as spaces for creation. In some of the other slides, you'll see, like, here's Carson Holler's giant psychotank of 1999. And he's an artist who always works at the edge of art and architecture, particularly to bring out participation and play, where the audience is invited to experience something. Here, a sensory and a social proposition. In 2006, this is a project that I did with the collective Urban Vessel, Slip, to take over the Harrison Baths swimming pool as a theater space. Reimagine it at night. By day, it's a swimming pool. By night, it was a maze of theatrical and dance pieces that you wandered through. Again, the night. I'm interested right now in the night. It's the next issue of Scapegoat I'm working on is on the night. Here's a Vauxhall pleasure gardens of the 18th century. This architecture of the temporal and also temporal and temporary, engaging in architectures and spaces of the city in a different way at different times of day, places that we might ignore at one season or 1 hour hold a lot of potential for me. Here's Saigwo Khan's cultural melting bath. This is a 1997 project that invited people to bathe, people who didn't know each other to bathe, and that's one relationship that I have with the next project, which is a night swim for the first Nuit Blanche. This is by The Waves, myself and Marcus Boone. First Nuit Blanche, nobody thought anyone would really come out to look at art at night, but it turned out not to be so. And this project at Trinity Bellwood's pool was trying to expand on that potential use of spaces, to have the pool open for the whole night, open to all. We had musicians, sound artists, DJs, transforming the pool space through installation as well into a kind of Roman bathhouse. Exploring the edge of the social and the possible within the contemporary moment is something you always have to keep looking at the edge. That was Rasmus and I there DJing. Here's a project by Tadeusz Kantor, which is an inspiring piece of theater that involves a boat and a conductor, and he's conducting the waves, and the audience was listening to the waves as if they were listening to an orchestra. And I think this kind of pulling out of the latent poetry of everyday life and all the spaces and places around us is something that I'm always trying to do. And here we are up at the Sunnyside Bathing Pavilion, again with the waves in 2012. This pavilion was built in 1922 as a change space. If you haven't been to this building, please go explore. It's a beautiful construction that's just for changing into your bathing suit to go swimming, and then a second floor loggia to watch swimmers and boaters, kind of a public form that wouldn't exist today. I'm inspired in this project by Ligia Pape's Divisor, which is a collective parade through the street in a costume made for multiple people, a direct inspiration to the costume design. Here we have part of this ritual procession of music and performance. I'm sorry I can't list all the amazing participants and the many attendees. Here are the dancers addressing the lake, and eventually they move into the lake. Up at an elevated section of the loggia, I created different bathing spaces. This was called the Temple to the Moon, an ice bath with sound by Juliet Palmer, which was recorded at the Humber River, as well as wind chimes. And I think that procession and ritual is something that really has the power to transform cities and transform our own day-to-day lives outside of carnivals. This is Olinda's carnival in Brazil. The memory of the carnival is always with people, and that embedding within, this is our version at the end of the Sunnyside Fire on the Water piece, Marketo Aberto, bringing the crowd back across the beach and through up into the building. The memory of that will forever change the way people see that building. When you go down to Sunnyside, if you're at the party, you're going to look at that place differently, and I think that has a great power.
Thank you, Christine. Our next speaker is Rohan Walters. Rohan, since graduating in 1997, has had an art and design practice. It's been a very collaborative practice where he's worked with architects, engineers, and many local communities. He's founded his own design firm called Spaces by Rohan, and perhaps most importantly, Rohan has donated a lot of his time over the past many years to facilitate design projects for community groups who otherwise may not have access to professional design expertise. And he's done this with too many groups to mention, but perhaps one of the most recognizable areas would be the Dufferin Grove Residents Association. So I want to thank him for his community contribution and welcome him to the stage.
Good afternoon. So it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be asked. So whenever you're ready. Okay. So character and caricature, the energy and space between the two is something that I relish. This is me and doing some furniture shopping for a client, and I was just attracted to this building in South Beach. It was a little over the top, but it got our attention. This was a dream. This occurred to me in a dream when I asked the question, why am I in design and architecture? And I got this house literally in a dream, so I decided to draw it. It was that notion that good creativity is a restorative element. Gervais, the photographer, I have this hanging in my living room. That's Eager. She's a graffiti artist in town, and that's friends and their kids. So bringing the energy, the so-called nefarious energy, into the light and telling our stories. It's beautiful. Like attracts like. That is to say, this is my friend John. He's a musician. He came by. He lives in the neighborhood. He built this, and I just thought the relationship between art attracting other artists was something that I wanted to foster. And so we're now good friends. This is my grade 8 teacher, a woman feminist, and she, I guess I'm part of her garden. We became friends years later, and we were designing a table for her music room, as well as we've designed her garden and we've designed her outdoor room. Collaboration. This is Rusty Girl. That's her company. And I gave Rusty Girl this sketch because of a coffee house. I was designing a cabinet. I said, Rusty, I need this to just do this for my shelf. And she came out one shot. At one point in my life, I was a bit of a Grinch for Christmas. And so again, I use art drawing to form a relationship, to become friendly with Christmas. And so I made this card for friends. And interestingly enough, the energy overflowed. I got some work. Raw. Skin in the game, blood in the game, debt in the game, risk in the game. So that's part of what I do, and I see in the left-hand slide is what a tenant will do in the space when they feel free to do stuff. And on the right-hand slide, I'm actually preparing an aluminum conduit for the Electrical Safety Authority. This is a postcard I did for a local abandoned lot, which is now in Parkdale. And it was to do a playground, water reservoir, and solar triplex to interest potential developers and to do it in a way that we're not accustomed to. That's my brother with the cowboy hat, and that's my design associate. And what happened was I grew up working next to a farm, and I would help out the local farmer. And this is a friend's barn, and I get invited to it once in a while, and he doesn't know that I want to actually live and make his farm and work again. This is Francine Hubin. This is a Delft University, Technical University Library, one of my favorite buildings in the whole world. So I believe in drawing something into my DNA. So I traveled there, and I did, with a good cup of coffee. Tress Schroeder. I didn't have a lot of time looking after kids to read things, but one of the books I read was Women in the Making of the Modern House. And this is the Schroeder house. And I went there, I was so inspired, and I drew it to take it, again, into my DNA, yeah? What I ask my clients to do is to dream openly, dream honestly. We may not be able to do it, but sometimes we can. If the process is there, the willingness is there, the people are there, the skills are there. He wanted a contemplation space. Et voila. So, and finally, this was a random act of artistic expression by my daughter on a leftover envelope, and she was about to throw it out, and I was just blown away. It was just so cool. But again, it speaks to random acts of art, random acts of love, random acts of kindness are the key to kind of a sharing the energy. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Rohan. Our next speaker is Kim Story. Kim is a founding partner of Brown-STOREY Architects, and most recently, a founder of the Office for Responsive Architecture. This is a multidisciplinary practice that crosses lines between architecture, art, infrastructure, and urban design. Most notably, I believe, in 2000, Brown-STOREY were selected by international competition to design what I feel, what many critics feel, is one of the most successful public spaces in the country, and that was Dundas Square, a project that took almost 15 years to manifest itself, and it manifested itself into quite a success. So I want to welcome Kim Story to our stage.
Thanks very much. I'm paraphrasing the question, is architecture art, to can infrastructure be art? We spend a lot of our time in our office looking at the relationship of art and architecture of our large civic infrastructure systems, water, transportation networks, and sometimes all of them together. So I wanted to show some of our work that looks at infrastructure in particular. And I think that these landforms can be considered as a vast architecture and at the same time made up of small objects. This is somewhere between the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport and Montreal Centre-Ville, which is the site of the UNESCO International Moving Landscapes Competition. Tristan Garcia writes, "We must understand that it could have been different, that it could have been what it is differently, and that it is ugly if it is insufficiently what it is." In this competition, we talked about the beautiful. Garcia says also that the beautiful would be intensity attributed to the identity of a thing. The first response to this problem defines what the beautiful is, an idea. So we talked about a gold circuit network, which is almost like a garrison buried ravine traveling through, which actually connects things like green spaces, neighborhoods that were torn apart, and actually makes an ability to walk to the airport from Centre-Ville in Montreal to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport. That's a 21-kilometer route. Again, another type of circuitry that we looked at actually is the intensification of civic infrastructure in our water systems. This is showing a 60-meter underpass tunnel of water going underneath open spaces in the city with 60-meter below ground with access tunnels below. And where those come up to the top, we actually create open spaces that become an archipelago. The West Toronto Rail Path is a line. It's a linear idea of how a single line and a single use of a cyclist expressway can become more than that. It becomes the long view to the city. It connects it to neighborhoods, it connects it to city streets, and it gives us a new idea of another way of looking at our railway infrastructure in the city. And at the bottom line, you see it as a line. The second line, you see it as a detail where the path is kind of curved, so it allows larger areas of open space and terminations at what used to be dead-end streets. So those things completely connect together. And what you have at the end is an active transportation corridor, green boundaries, bridge connections, community linkages, and the train, all put together. And they energize each other, they don't diminish each other. So the idea is intensity and bringing things to those spaces and those infrastructures that make sense. In the Victoria Park subway station, you can see at the top there, that's what we used to have. It fulfilled its prime directive of climbing into a subway station and somehow finding your way to a bus. The new version that we worked with TTC on has a new transit plaza in Bub, which connects it to, and you can see on the left-hand side, to the gardens on the other side of Victoria Park. It connects it to the high-rise neighborhood on the other side, and its sides and its tops and its backs are all now part of the important sides. Every side is important of this object. So that becomes bringing some kind of intensity to a transportation network. This is a bridge competition that we did several years ago. It actually won the popular support. It was an alternate bridge across the railway lands where we used the precedent of Lady Simcoe's bridge, drawing a Plato bridge as a braided strand, so you actually make the bridge the public space. And in this bridge, which is one that we did for the competition on the Green Line at Dovercourt, you actually make a bridge connection that connects again to the city streets, to the Green Line, across the railway tracks, and brings public art to the idea of crossing in special places where these infrastructures intersect. Oracle Square, now you can see the idea where these things kind of come as very smart sketches at the beginning, are modeled in 3D, and this becomes an idea of a network of media, entertainment, of bringing information where things like TIFF could show films on these things, where the public square becomes a moment of intensity and not so much of clearing the area. This is sort of the antithesis of Dundas Square in some ways. So physical presence is the primary constituent of public space. So this brings the whole idea of intensity and media and interactive transmissions. You take those ideas of those vertical transmissions to finalist entry for the CN Tower Plaza, and at this point you see that all these landmarks creating a way through a condition between Bremner Boulevard and John Street and Front Street, where there's an entrance from a parking garage. So the landmark at the parking garage became very key to us as the marquee. So we start with sketches, we go to models, we go to debris, we go to a very messy office, we go back to the refined model again, and then which changes then to the three-dimensional modeling of that object, how it connects to the other parts. You can see the entrance to the parking garage below there at the top, and at the bottom image, you can see how it connects to a small urban space behind it. So the object itself becomes as important as the entire passage for us. I can't believe I have too much time. I'm either, you see I had all these notes, I haven't read them once. And this is like the brand, so you have all those images sliding on it, and it became the brand for the entire entry for us. It became, that detail and that shape, the object, is as much about the whole infrastructure as anything else was. I'm ending with this slide about what we called local monsters, where this is our sort of protest against the small-scale gestures, which are important, but the things like through the Garrison, this is a return to our roots on Garrison Ravine, buried ravine that we did so much research on, that we needed something larger to mark the presence of the ravine, and not just letters in the sidewalk, not canoes filled with milkweed, which are nice, but large monsters that remind us of the monsters that lay buried behind us, and between us, and below us. So these would be these structures that mark the route of the ravine through the city. That's it.
Thank you, Kim. Our next presenter, Paul Raff. While he is an architect and the founder of Paul Raff Studios, prior to being an architect, Paul established himself as a professional artist and had an art practice for many years. He came to my attention while I was a student, where he did what I think was quite a wonderful architectural project, where he dismantled a house. He, piece by piece, took the house apart and put it piece by piece into a gallery, documented it and presented it accordingly, and it, in a way, foreshadowed his environmental practice many years later by calling attention to what's in our buildings. So Paul Raff is a senior partner of Paul Raff Studios, as I mentioned, while his practice does cross the boundaries between art, public art, infrastructure, and architectural design, his focus most recently, is sustainability and low energy footprints in architecture. So I'd like to welcome Paul Raff.
Good afternoon. So as Michael mentioned, I am an architect. I'm licensed to practice architecture. I was trained in architecture, and I have a firm that does practice architecture. We mostly design buildings in this part of the world and elsewhere. And in a minute, you'll see some images of our work cycling by. But I also studied, to some degree, fine art and practiced as an artist before I became an architect. And my firm still takes on commissioned, mostly public, permanent outdoor artworks in this part of the world and elsewhere. It's just always been intrinsic to my approach to architecture to think of architecture as an art. I sort of imagine I approach it the way a writer who writes novels might approach literature, the way a creative filmmaker might approach the creation of an artistic work and experience through filmmaking, or a choreographer through dance. And I realize that you don't need to approach architecture that way. There are building science and engineering concerns, there are anthropological lenses, there are different ways to look at architecture in the built environment. But the artistic approach and effect of a building is one of them. I'd also like to point out that we live in a society that's governed by law, and there is a law in Ontario, it's the provincial legislation called the Architects Act, which regulates how architecture and architects behave in practice in the province of Ontario. And I haven't read the entire law, but I'm pretty sure, I would wager, that there's very little, if any, mention of art or the artistic function of architecture in the Architects Act of the provincial legislation. I also think it's worth noting that art and architecture were not always so separate, so siloized. Let's say 500 years ago, it would not be abnormal for the same professional to be sculpting a figure of a human being out of marble with a chisel, and in the afternoon be drawing floor plans and designing the facade of a building. Boundaries have become less blurry and more defined, and a lot of this just has to do with the realities of our socio-economic evolution in an ongoing process of specialization. We are increasingly specialized in our socio-economic reality. Even the field of architecture has become more specialized. For example, there are many firms that specialize in healthcare facilities or in high-rise condominium residential towers, for example. Or shopping malls as another example. I think the separation and siloization has been going on for a long time, but when I study the history of art and architecture, I see a particularly notable kind of truncation in the 1970s, when art was becoming increasingly experimental, bursting out of the gallery with installations, fieldworks, earthworks, performance art, and architecture was increasingly entrenched and defensive because we increasingly came to be living in a world of liability and legal responsibility. And the reason the Architects Act and the governing laws exist is to protect the public so that there's someone to blame and someone to sue if this roof collapses or the building catches fire and we can't all get out in adequate time. Someone needs to be held accountable and their insurance company needs to pay for it. So the sad part of that is that architects a little bit too much these days are in the business of covering their backsides and in coordinating the work of a team of specialists who also are taking responsibility for particular aspects of the work. It used to be that architects would say, design the chairs that you sit in and work out the lighting. Now they're specialist lighting designers and they're choosing products like chairs and other furniture that are components that will be installed in the building. So that's not to say that the artistic potential of architecture is disappearing in any way, shape, or form. It just means the way we practice to achieve artistic potential needs to be different. And fortunately, I've witnessed myself, and I think other people in the room probably have, that there are new modes of collaboration that are happening where, as Kim Story's work that she just showed, she talked about, in my experience, I see urban designers, architects, engineers, artists, landscape architects, artists coming together and collaborating. In my case, I've been working also on the design of a new subway station, specific components of it, or in the creation of a new public park that's currently under construction in North York, where I was part of the programming of it, the design of the facade of the pavilion building, the design of a new sculptural band shell. So I think there's a whole new wave of potential in this new reality. I want to make 3 observations in the short time I have. We can always talk after to contribute to the conversation about the artistic nature of architecture. First of all, it is at best useless, in other words, not fruitful, to talk about any work as either being art or not being art, being architecture or not being architecture. It's interesting to talk about art and architecture. I do it all the time and I love it. But just to say, you've probably heard people say, that's not art, my 4-year-old could do. That kind of conversation isn't useful. And I suggest when you hear it happening that you put an end to it or sidestep it and avoid it and move on. Another observation I'd like to make is that in my experience, there's a sort of general misperception that there's this spectrum between artistic creativity and capacity and technical competence. And I can tell you that some work exhibits more artistic innovation than others, but I can tell you that the great artistic works of architecture and the great artistic architects are very technically proficient. They can't do it without being in control of their medium any more than a painter can be a great painter without being in control of the chemistry of pigments or the physics of color and light optics. Finally, on maybe something a little more personal to my practice, I wanted to note that, at least in the last 50 years or so, we're living in a world where our collective consciousness of issues of environmental responsibility, ecological sustainability have come to the forefront. And frankly speaking, as an architect and a parent, it's for a damn good reason. 40% of the world's energy consumption, including Canadian energy consumption, is attributable to buildings and construction. And it's very important that architects and other building professionals in the construction and related industries take this seriously. This is a greater carbon footprint than the entire transportation sector combined. And I'm not the only one I know who's on the artistic end of the spectrum who sees taking on issues of environmental sustainability as potentially being fruitful drivers of artistic innovation in architecture. Now, it's a little hard to find. If you go to a magazine store, you'll see cool new building forms in very fashionable design magazines, and then you can go to the kind of more technical building science end of the aisle where you'll see, green building and architecture, and there are very technical articles about, toxic materials and local materials and so on. But there's no reason why these two worlds have to be so divided. There's great potential in finding new artistic forms and possibilities for the built environment around us by thinking of issues of environmental performance and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker, Betsy Williamson. Betsy is a founding partner of Williamson Chong, a very successful experimentational firm here in Toronto that's received a lot of attention recently. They're perhaps the youngest of all the firms on the stage right now. But along with being a very active partner in the firm, I want to highlight Betsy's contributions to the profession, her volunteer work. 3 specific aspects. The first one, that Betsy is a member of the Waterfront Design Review Board, a very important panel that reviews all public architecture on the Toronto waterfront, and they have been instrumental in literally bumping up the quality of the architecture at Harbourfront significantly in the past few years. Secondly, as a member of the Royal Institute of Architects of Canada, she sits on a committee called Aging in Place, which examines the design implications of architecture design, regulation, and our aging population. We will all, at some point, benefit from Betsy's work on that committee. And thirdly, Betsy sits on a organization called B.E.S, which is an advocacy organization for women and minorities in the architectural profession. So I want to welcome Betsy Williamson.
So we'll try this here. So architecture is art and is not art at the same time. Quoting Churchill, we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. His comments related architecture to democratic principles. Today I will speak about architecture as engagement. It affects us viscerally, intellectually, as individuals, and as a society. Architects' materials of production are typically tools of mediation. We create a simulation of the project and not the project itself. Drawings, models, and computer simulations communicate specific instructions for execution. The reflected ceiling plan of Mies van der Rohe's banking pavilion on the right describes the subtle widening of the beams in the center, which creates the visual heaviness of the gridded ceiling plane that we all know and love in this building in the photo on the left. These artifacts of mediation, when divorced from technical drawings, can be easily seen as abstract representations. This model for the ceiling of a house is an investigation of light and form. Through abstraction, we are able to create the space to engage these aspects of the project prior to being locked into the construction drawings. When I started my practice, we made a commitment to technology. This is a parametric model of the light cone from the previous slide in a program called Inventor, which allows us to track the bill of goods for the materials and foresee construction issues in a live model while we change the angles of the cone to direct light in specific ways. It is not just architectural production, but the architectural studio that has changed. Digital tools have given us access to means of production that go beyond typical representation. Architects can now have direct engagement with the final product. From robotic arms to digital charrettes, we are engaged with spatial production in a fundamentally different way. As these tools become available to us, we embrace their parameters and limitations. Occupying 450 square feet within a 100,000 square foot convention center, this project's stock space was warm, vertical, small, and quiet. The space directly engaged the body and challenged you to rethink your relationship to the quality of space that surrounds you. The space was created through the removal of stock material from a conceptually full volume that measured 24 feet long and 12 feet tall. The modules embodied traits of the grid associated with the length and width of the material, the topographic contours associated with the depth of the material, and the isoparametric grooves that create the surface, and we made that ourselves. Fabrication is also a way we explore material engagement. The culmination of a body of research about innovation in wood construction, this project, Living Wood, explored wood's material history by extracting artifacts from a digital exploration of the effects of mass movements in the landscape on the growth and form of trees. Taking the form of a distorted digital surface, Tracings is made up of 288 squares of Ontario white maple. Each piece is different, carved to a depth that registers the angle of a curved surface. Up close, the subtle differences between each piece become apparent, and the result mimics the forest in that each piece is unique. Origins, the companion piece to Living Wood here, is a series of prints where we see the overlaps in density similar to that of the projected surface registered in the Tracings piece. These drawings are not a tool of production, but instead a vehicle for presenting the material and engaging the public in a discourse of wood production in an unconventional way. Now, the majority of our work, however, is client-based building practice, with most of our projects being homes, and everyone here has an idea of what a home should be. A corner lot in Chinatown was the site for a multi-unit and multi-generational house. It stacks rental units in a grandparent suite underneath a single-family home. The massing of the house intentionally conflates the units into a single gesture that holds the urban corner. And city homes necessarily engage the public realm. Looking at the house, it's impossible to tell which unit is which, thereby projecting a democratic face where the renter is equivalent to the owner. There's an exterior toughness to the project, as the owner wanted openness, but also a high level of privacy. And it changes once you get inside. Each suite directly engages an exterior space. As architects, we strive to bring ideas of materiality and abstraction in line with client parameters like program, budget, and schedule, while also challenging the binary spatial elements that make up the building blocks of architectural design: solid and void, public and private, interior and exterior. The topography of Toronto's ravines allows for a different type of engagement. Sited just above the decommissioned Ballawine Rail, which has become a walking path for hikers and neighbors, this house reclaims the ravine as a new public realm and allows it to come up and through the house. The home for a family of 5 integrates a series of terrace spaces strung together by a stair that coincides with the cascading topography, and the large sliding windows blur the distinction between interior and exterior space. This absence of boundary is further enhanced by the wraparound condition at the corner, and the kids treat the spaces as if they're one. In our Toronto neighbourhoods with long and narrow Victorian lots, we do well with light at the front and at the back, but it's really tough to get light into the middle. Our client here asked for a study of contrast, not only oppositions in style and form, but also in the color palette, citing a love for the contrast of dark against light. So we began this project with ideas about engaging light. This is something that we tackle in every urban project. By creating a void between the original house at the front and the new addition at the back, we were able to move the family through the project with a telescoping spiral stair that is a vehicle for both light and movement. And moving out of the city, when challenged with siting a small country house on a large lot, the idea of placemaking dictated the siting. By carving out a place at the base of the hillside instead of on top, the house is less a destination but a stopping point on the mountain biking trails and the paths of the horses and snowmobiles as they emerge from the community over the seasons. This house literally engages with the ground. It tucks into the hill on the back and opens onto expansive vista to the north, collapsing the distant landscape into the interior space of the family room. Buildings create a sense of place and define our memories. They can be modern, traditional, old, or new. To paraphrase the critic and writer Paul Goldberger, architecture is not bread on the table nor justice in the courtroom. While it doesn't sustain life, it can give the sustained life meaning. It matters in the way that art matters. It makes life better. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael Awad. I'm going to take a slightly contrarian view. The question that's posed here is, can architecture be art? And I'm going to take a position that if architecture can be art, art can possibly be architecture. And I'm going to go deeply into 3 projects and discuss why public art in particular, the lines between public art and architecture have been blurred largely because of some of the comments Paul Raff made earlier around professionalization and liability. First project is at the Ontario Science Centre. After 30 years, their Great Hall had to be revamped. It needed a refresh. The architect Raymond Moriyama was on this project, on this committee. The space had to be changed fundamentally, but unfortunately, the one thing that we couldn't do was deal with the ceiling. Everything had to hang from the ceiling. Along with my partner, David Rokeby, we proposed a large hanging sculpture that was computer-controlled and motorized called Cloud. This sculpture had 100 moving elements, and it would represent through movement the 3 phases of water. Once we were selected, we had to mock up how big it was in the space, and at the time nobody realized how big it was. But we did successfully transform the space into something new. My first impression when I saw photos of the space and what was above the space, my first impression was, forget the art, get rid of the ceiling, and just show the structure of the building, because the Great Hall has these 200-foot-long, huge train-size trestles that I thought were absolutely beautiful. And it turns out that we couldn't touch the plaster at all because the plaster in the ceiling was infused with asbestos. It was perfectly safe as long as you didn't want to get rid of it. It would have cost millions of dollars to get rid of. Our proposal was a 100-foot square grid of motorized, computer-controlled motors that was built in the space. For any artists in the audience, if you want to make your work permanent, make it bigger than the client could ever dismantle and get rid of. In order to lift the sculpture, which weighed about 10 tons, we had to bring in rigging from the theater industry for a simultaneous lift at 10 points at the same time with winches. It all had to happen inside the truss space. For this, we needed a number of consulting engineers. This is the final sculpture. It's 100 feet across, 100 motors networked together. Each element rotates slowly, and the sculpture over a period of 5 to 10 minutes goes through these phases of water, of liquid, and of gas. Second project is in the TELUS building downtown at Union Square. This is the building affixed to the south end of Union Station, so it required public artwork. My proposal was twofold. There's a long mural, and there's a hanging sculpture. In this case, the problem here was that the lobby had 150 feet of wall that was featureless because behind the wall was a parking structure and parking ramp, so there couldn't be anything in the wall. And by the architect's own admission, the lobby had no focus. So the lobby needed a focus. They said, well, let's make it art. Our art consisted of 2 things: a photographic mural that is 100 feet long, and secondly, a hanging sculpture that included these custom-made LEDs. We used 30,000 of them. They're all individually addressable and hanging on very light, delicate wires. Each one had to be, this was all fabricated in California, in Silicon Valley. Each one had to be examined and tested individually before installation. You could start seeing the most onerous nature of these projects. One of the most important people on our team is not the engineer, the architect, or even the client, it's our lawyer. For each one of these projects, our contracts are now 20 to 50 pages, which is nothing compared to the architectural contract to design a building. The wiring all had to happen by hand. It happened 40 feet above the ground. We pulled more than 6 kilometers of cabling. There are 12 computers that run this project, and it all had to be done by hand. You can see here the LED cube is an output device. It's literally a 3-dimensional display, true 3 dimensions, no mirrors, no tricks. And you could see the final installation where we had to do our diagnostics up in the ceiling because we had to replace a number of them that just didn't work. This is now hanging as a permanent installation. We also had to create the software that volumized images, moving images through this 3-dimensional display. This is the first pixel matrix ever installed at this size, at this permanence around the world. So there's nothing off the shelf in this project. Here we see a Toronto scene, a streetcar. We volumize the streetcar, and it literally drives through the cube in 3 dimensions. And here we see the arrangement of the photographic mural, which was photographed right in front of the building, so it's a local commission, and the LED cube up above, and the content in the cube is of the city, and the content of the mural is also of the city. About a month after this opened, I was challenged by somebody who saw themselves in the mural, and we had a legal kerfuffle off on the side. Third project is the Toronto Ripley's Aquarium. You see here, there is a gray wall right in the corner. Because the site was so small, the mechanical rooms could not be put in the basement. So part of the mechanical space had to be put on the facade of the building, which created this big blank wall that the residents took offense to during the design review, and therefore the politician took offense to. So what did they do? To fix the blank wall, they brought in, who else? The artists. After 12 proposals over a period of about 12 months, we came up with a school of wind vanes. There are two commissions on the site. One is in the lobby, which is a hanging mobile of fish. And the second one is this cluster of wind vanes outside. Because it's an overhead piece in public, there was a year and a half of testing through all different seasons and climates, failure testing of all the components. Everything had to be over-engineered because, like the Science Center, our failure scenario was a teenager with a backpack. What if a teenager throws the backpack at the art? Well, everything has to work in such a way that the art doesn't dismantle, fall, and hit someone else. So any art overhead or any art in public, the biggest issue is liability. It has to be made safe. This is the school of wind vanes. They work in 3 dimensions as opposed to just 2, a traditional wind vane, and they find the wind for wherever the wind and turbulence is coming, and they actually act like a flock of birds. They wave together. Sometimes they're still together. And so what I want you all to take away from my talk, next time you see public art somewhere, first, enjoy the public art, and then secondly, ask yourself, what were they trying to fix? Thank you. Yes, very well said. Architecture shouldn't be reduced to its lowest common denominator, that as we are very, let's say, supportive of public art gestures and the effort and the expense that goes into public art gestures, we should be as supportive to take architecture from its most functional state to a state of artfulness. And those transformations, as we've seen, don't come easy, and they don't come cheap. There is a public investment to be made, but those investments will, over time, maintain not only the vibrancy of the building and the interest of the building, but it'll maintain literally the economic value of the building.
I'd like to add into that, one of the things I was trying to suggest in the presentation was that the scale of architecture itself is an art, I believe, because it's about an idea. But good architecture has an idea at its base. It has an intensity of things, an intensity of intentions, and you create it out of a set of elements that you bring together on the site. And it's I don't think that is so much different than the production of what you would call a work of art, that you create things. You don't kind of personally make all those things anymore either. It's not necessarily the person that's drawing and life drawing in the evenings and bringing that to the office. So I think the architecture is art, but I think it is under attack. It absolutely is under attack, where the production of architecture is more and more kind of squeezed out as part of I think the larger teams can be very good, but they can also be dead meat, where, are there any engineers in the room? Okay, just checking. But where the functional necessity of the piece becomes the bottom line of things, and the larger, like a lot of our larger projects, a lot of the infrastructure projects that we're so interested in are run by large public-private partnerships, and the whole kind of mechanisms that are put in place to produce the piece of infrastructure at the end of it has very little room for art or urban design. Where it comes from is from the citizens who demand it. And what's strangely enough, when you think about these large infrastructure projects, which are literally billions of dollars now,
And the urban design layer, which is like, a quarter of an inch thick on top of that, but that's what everyone sees at the end, is the piece that really needs to be paid attention to. And that urban design piece is the piece that actually tries to integrate all those things into an idea. So it takes all those functional operations. So I think that's really critical that our largest investments of public funds are going into these huge infrastructure projects, and it really isn't that much more money to make them good and to make them exciting and city building. So when you're making $1 billion, it creates more investment on its edges. That's the thing that urban design should do. When you build a piece of city building, you build a linear park, everything on its edges starts to improve and starts to create more city building things. It's like a patch or a virus almost.
Rohan, your building at the corner of Lansdowne and College is perhaps one of the most visible canvases for public art that I know of. It has over the years had multiple murals, some of them interesting, some of them not, some of them artful, some of them not, but it constantly transforms every time somebody else takes a swing at it. And in that case, I've always thought of that building as being a wonderful, architecture is a wonderful easel for art.
It can be. It definitely can be. For me, it's relationships. Art, the art of life, the art of relationship informs the kind of work that I can do. So, for instance, the kind of relationship I have with my engineer can get me a certain quality of work, or it can really make life difficult. The quality relationship I have with my accountant can affect the kind of investment that I can make in people to bring a project together. Or, yeah. So, risking goes with the territory. And that is my relationship with Toronto. I risk. And sometimes it works. And sometimes it doesn't, but that's part of all our stories. So, what I hope is, with regards to our architecture, there's no difference for me. Art and finance, I've seen elegant equations, It really is an attitude. And so, what I try to do is to place myself in a position where I can be a catalyst to create an attitude, where I can find it or make it. Does that help?
It does, yeah. Also good. I think, Paul, your project under the Gardner at Tortown, it's one of the projects Paul showed, which was a big mirrored surface, very beautifully detailed and engineered. If it were up to me, I would line the entire underside of the Gardner with this mirror, because as an economical gesture, it adds 0.25% to $1 billion project, but its impact in bringing in light and bringing in reflection, playful shapes and views and visions into what is otherwise a dead space was really, really lyrical. And it's one of these projects that I feel has a much bigger footprint conceptually than it does physically. Why isn't that becoming the other side of the Gardner as policy? Why haven't you done that?
I don't know the answer to that question. I will say that your previous question about, considering architecture as art, I think of the whole world as one nearly endless, ongoing environmental and performance artwork. Whether it be, the planes cutting through the sky, or this, the strange rhythms of columns flying by as I take the subway, or the cracks in pavement. And I think the advantage of thinking about architecture as art is it opens you as a person to receive the artistic expression of the environment that you're in. It also has the advantage of you potentially holding the makers of buildings, the people responsible for shaping our urban lives, to a higher standard in terms of what they produce. But then to me as an artist, it also made me able to make a very simple artwork out of an array of reflective steel. It's really simple. It's just put some pieces of mirror and hang them all in a plane, because all it really does is reflects and visually transforms the incredible vitality and phenomena that already are the urban performance environmental artwork that's around us every day. So you look up into the underside of this overpass, and instead of seeing a dark underbelly, you're seeing someone carrying their groceries kind of upside down, or a flash of headlights flying by, and you're not sure what's where. It adds light and vitality, and just takes the colorful human activities, including what's going on in this room right now, and frames them in a way that hopefully is enriching for the experience of the environment.
And my final question to Betsy: your firm has invested heavily in digital fabrication and digital design and production, which has led you to make these wild and wonderful shapes that you embed in people's houses. And I'm sure during those discussions, the word art and artfulness comes to fore. The difference being, this is someone's house, this is someone's staircase, this is someone's kitchen that is being treated artfully. If I get tired of a piece of art on my wall, I can take it down. How do you deal with clients, their apprehension about having an artful staircase or an artful front door?
Well, I think one of the ideas of this talk today is to encourage people to take notice when something moves you. So I get moved by moments in architecture, I get moved by artworks, all the time, and equally so. I can walk into a Lucan building that I've visited numerous times over 20 years and kind of feel the same kind of jump in my heart every single time. And I think what's really lovely about the clients that we have is they make a commitment to both the process. Building a house is really difficult. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of trust. That the clients who kind of want to really go for it, kind of in any of the projects that we do, really make a commitment to the work. I'm not one who puts art off my walls. If I buy something, I feel like I've made a real commitment to the artist and to the piece, and that I'm also not one who wants Toronto to be just a little bit better. I want the whole city to be way better. So this discussion of does the public art component can make kind of this grab-boring wall a little bit better. That's just, it's endlessly frustrating. I want the building to be amazing. I want the artwork that we see in the public realm to not have to solve a problem, but just stand alone and just, inspire people and make everyone's kind of hearts leap when they see it. So it's not a question of, well, am I going to get sick of that? It's a more fundamental kind of feeling about commitment to maybe going back to you're living in this world comment. We're not just technocrats trying to check off a bunch of boxes and get a building permit. We're using the kind of a diverse education where we learn both technical on the architecture side and artistic principles of abstraction and proportion on the art side, and try to bring it all together to make really wonderful things in the
I would take a position that here in North America, particularly in Toronto, that we have not been constrained by geography or economy the way so many other parts of the world have. And we do have, in certain places around the city and in certain projects, we have the luxury of space, and that space is often given over to the public realm. And I think if we're going to invest anything, if we're going to make a major investment anywhere, it should be in the quality of the public realm. The lobby of a building is often a public space. The lobby of a hospital is a public space. Those spaces should be beautiful. They should be uplifting. They need not and should not be designed with the same spatial constraints as an operating room or a patient room or an office for that matter. there is something important about public space that we have to encourage and celebrate. So I understand your question, and I sympathize with the question, but I think if other places around the world had the ability to have grand public spaces, they would. So I don't think we should be shying away from grand public spaces. We should be trying to make them better. Perhaps I should explain some of the references that were just made. The OMB is the Ontario Municipal Board, which is a provincial body that acts as an equalizer and has the ability to come into a specific jurisdiction, like Toronto, like Hamilton, Kingston, and they have the ability to supersede local planning rules. They have the ability to supersede community directives. And for many years, the Ontario Municipal Board has been criticized as being a facilitator for the development community, which, to be fair, the Ontario Municipal Board's role is to try to treat the entire province the same and to apply the same rules to Kingston, to Toronto, to Ottawa. But what that does, in effect, it dumbs down the ability of local architects and local communities to improve the quality of their design. I know Kim has come up against many of these situations in the past, and there is a frustration, if you can speak to, as a designer, as an architect who aspires to improve the quality of work, what the municipal frameworks are doing to really suppress and also Betsy, her work on the design review panel, which is constantly fighting to improve the quality of work.
Well, burn a few more bridges then and talk about how the municipality kind of makes me angry. I think what's interesting about it, I think there's so many ridiculous rules, but I also, I'm strangely enough a supporter of the OMB as an institution. I know they make a lot of bad decisions, and I think that's the thing that has to be addressed. But I also think politically, politicians use the OMB as an opportunity to go with like building things that aren't up to snuff or aren't responsible as city building. If you have a site along the subway, for instance, and someone wants to build, 10 stories, you should be building density along subway lines, for example. And yet the community, the politician says, no, I'm only going to allow a 2-story building here because he knows that will get him votes in his local municipality. He's not acting responsibly, he's not talking about policy statements. He's just saying, I'm going to say 2 stories, and I know it's going to go with the OMB, and the OMB can take the flak. And I think that happens a lot in the city. And I think really if we had more responsible planning and more responsible policy decisions, and politicians that would kind of take a few risks once in a while, it would make a huge difference. And so I think in terms of building responsibly and building good public spaces and bringing quality into it, I think it's a kind of integrated response. I don't think that the planning rules in place are so much a problem, but I think they have to allow for flexibility. I think over the years that the building envelopes that are addressed are unimaginative. They don't allow for any artistry to them. For example, we're down in DuPont looking at the whole idea of employment lands and being adjacent to the green line and being adjacent to rail lines. All of those really tough infrastructural decisions and how you build in the city and how you capitalize on those things have not been addressed properly by the city. They found one Main Street example, the little ziggurat building, and said we're going to build that everywhere and we'll call it a day. I think we lack imagination in the city, and I think there should be more inputs for people to be able to talk about those ideas and actually bring new ways of thinking to the city.
And over to Betsy about the design review panel. This is a panel, one would ask themselves logically, why isn't there a design review panel for every district of the city? Why only the waterfront? And the waterfront is quite particular insofar as it is a complex and complex relationship between the municipality, the province, and the federal government. That complex relationship over the years has manifested itself in political struggle and lawsuits. So to mitigate all of these different forces, the Waterfront Review Panel was created as an autonomous body that is supposed to respond to the local community. And Betsy, can you speak to the struggles of trying to improve design and make our waterfront literally artful?
Well, I'm going to kind of build on what Kim said, because I think part of the issue and the perception of the OMB, because I agree that the OMB can be in a bit, can allow leapfrogging of old zoning and kind of not up-to-date city planning, where the city is growing incredibly quickly. And this is an issue that we see at Waterfront, where there really is no plan. On days, there'll be days where the planners will come in and present the new updated planning for the district on the exact same day that the developers and architects come in and present the buildings. And you can see that the negotiation has been condensed into basically one idea that is maybe not as big as the developers want, but it's definitely not as small as the city wants. And so there's this negotiation that happens kind of on the kind of back of house of the city, let's say. And it's my job and the other architects on the panel's job to respond to that and mitigate that and actually talk about design details, height, massing, and also bring up the ability of the city to keep up with development in terms of public parks, public space, schools, transit. So we end up talking about transit like all the time at every single meeting. Waterfront actually has an excellent public art program, and I think the work in at Corktown Common and in the new kind of the old Pan Am Village, the new district, is amazing. And I think that's some of the most interesting public art that's been opened in the last couple of years, because as an independent corporation, they really allow the artists to have freedom to do these kind of incredible projects, and there's a lot of it down there, which is great. One thing that I think the city could do and Toronto Waterfront could do, maybe just a show of hands, who in the audience knows kind of what's happening down on the waterfront? You know, the big plan, the scenario. I think that there should be a huge kind of move by Waterfront and the city to explain what, like, say, density on the subway lines. What's that going to look like? How can neighborhoods become comfortable with it before they see the one big 8-story building going up in the middle of the block? How can the Waterfront Toronto describe this amazing project that's happening at the interface between the city and Lake Ontario to everyone in this audience and get them excited about it? So I think that one thing that I would say maybe put a call out is say how can we kind of introduce architecture, the art of architecture, to the public in a bigger way. And I think that days like today are a huge part of that, which is why I'm personally interested in supporting Doors Open, and I go see things every year because kind of getting a connection to the buildings in the city and to art projects in the city is really important.
I'd just like to add something to that, having to do with vision and focusing on the vision. I think is one of the things that you are talking about. And I think that within this city at this moment, we're all so used to wrestling with, as architects, especially with authorities and regulations and a kind of punitive overall feeling about things. And a lot of the art of architecture is actually the weird stuff that you have to deal with every day. That's like talking to people on the phones and meetings. Like, how do you negotiate through all of the maze of stuff that you have to deal with? And I'm thinking in terms of the question about the environment, the environmental impact and that. And I think it would be great if we could sort of flip that on its head and see more what is the vision that we have in a very positive way, rather than in a punitive way. How can we should make everything smaller and more, is that the environmental progressive stance? Or could we look at it another way and say, how much more excellence can we bring to what it is we're making? And how much, I said before I used the word demand, how much more demand can the citizens of Toronto make for excellence in infrastructure, in buildings, we want to see, people
should be demanding to see just what you're describing, the vision of the completed, we're looking at these little alterations to transit along the waterfront right now, and the streetcar lines and the tunnel and everything. Let's bring it up so that we can focus on the positive vision, and we want the and version. We want the environment, creative environmental solutions, low impact in terms of VOC or any kind of emissions coming from transit. We want everything. We want more. We don't want less. And I wish that was more of a focus.
I should follow that up on both of your comments that this notion of design excellence is new and it is becoming quite an important issue for many new agencies. Waterfront Toronto, along with Metrolinx, both of which are big children of the province, both of them have departments of design excellence, both of them develop policies around design and public art because they're not hamstrung with legacy bureaucratic rules from multiple generations. And this is something we should be investing in each one of our new public agencies. Any other questions from the audience?
Hello. I'd like to say thanks for all of your insights thus far. If each of you could share maybe one intersection of art and architecture that stuck with you through your career, I'd appreciate that.
Very good way to close up.
That's right, start with me. Something that's actually stuck with me as a developer, a small developer, and I've actually worked with large developers, it's not my money. So small money, that's my money. Is the intersection of money and relaxation. So that is to say, to understand the role that it plays in the process from the initial ideation to then making it happen. So the quick example would be, I set this, suspecting for a while that good design costs exactly the same as bad design. In fact, good design costs less. The difference between good design and bad design is that the upfront capitalization is more. And that actually affects who can I contact as good thinkers or good artists or good people to help me get this project going. So I don't want to oversimplify or lower the tone, but the relationship that everything is art is serious. Everything that we do. And I took the time to study with developers and developer accountants to verify exactly that notion. And so for me personally, it will be to do bigger stuff in that new process that I have learned. I've learned the connection between passion, money, and art in architecture. And some private equity developers, private equity companies have helped me understand that very, very well. And I'm able to bring that into the process. Hopefully I can do more of it from a private standpoint as opposed to a municipal or provincial or federal project. So that we'll work out from that end. They're working out from other ends. I'm working out from the private industry. Is that kind of? Okay.
Mine will be really short. So an early visit to the Kimball Art Museum in Texas by Lou Kahn literally blew my mind. Think of the Dream House, which is a very simple, emptied-out apartment transformed by Miriam Zazula and Total Blank, the great composer Rohan. So it's a sonic and visual space of reverie. Architecture is very, very simple. The effects are very, very complex.
So the question is about a moment at the intersection of art and architecture, and I think about
I grew up as a small child in Saskatchewan. It was very horizontal and very flat. And I remember the first time I came to Toronto, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it was the late 1970s. And we drove in on the Don Valley Parkway, and I'd never seen anything like it before. And then we crossed the Gardner Expressway, and I'd never seen or been on anything like it before, flying, 3 stories in the air amongst the buildings over the lake. And we stopped and walked under the Gardner Expressway, and I'd never seen anything like, we didn't have things like that in Saskatchewan. And it was, I don't know if it was beautiful or ugly or, what it was, but it was, gave it a very unique character that I still remember many years later now to this day. And we walked all the way up Yonge Street, or Bay Street, Yonge Street, to the Eaton Centre, which had just opened a few years before. And I'd never seen this multi-layered building with all these levels and crossovers, which I later came to identify with futurist visions, which people in the early 20th century, artists of the early 20th century had imagined. Dynamic environments like that, which I've never seen before. And then I saw the Michael Snow sculpture of the Canadian geese at the south end of the Eaton Centre, how 30, 40 some geese at different moments of flight in the air. And I do love it, migratory birds, and it was a flock of geese flying north, which, animated that phenomenal space of the Galleria with a geographical orientation of north-south that's instantly connecting it to geographic space, planet Earth, the orbit of the Earth, the migration and connection to other places, and I just thought it was remarkable.
Thanks for the clue, Paul. Because I need to go back to my childhood, and my father was an architect in Chatham, Ontario, so I grew up, so I've been working in an architect's office since I was 12. But one of the buildings, and it was a post-war kind of condition where every young architect, and I think in my father's graduating class there were like 5, but they were getting all these amazing commissions, and he was like 30 years old, and he built this absolutely gorgeous convent in Chatham called the Pines, and I went to nursery school there, actually. But there was the chapel that he built, and it was like this courageous point where he had 2 models. One was a very traditional church, and one was this incredible kind of round, like an origami kind of structure that he made. And the nuns, to a person, said, no, forget the traditional, or go on with this. And they built the most incredible space. They had artists from Notre Dame University making these beautiful windows for the place. It was this kind of sublime space. And for me, it was that kind of gesture. And that someone could do it when they were 30 years old. They had 25-year-old engineers and 30-year-old architects. And a couple of guys from Tilbury who ended up in Eastern Construction who built it. I mean, it was this amazing kernel of this kind of fabulous space. And I think great architecture, great art, is this confluence of conditions that happen. It doesn't always happen. There's that one point when it does, and it does take your breath away.
I'll continue the reminiscence of childhood. Mine was, I think, grade 5, back when public schools used to take students for walks through downtown. We were on our way to the Art Gallery of Ontario. That was my first visit to that. But on the way, we went through City Hall and seeing this amazing new City Hall, this spaceship-like, incredibly sculpted. It didn't look like a building. It really looked like something that flew and had landed. And I remember specifically when the class went into the lobby to look at the sculpture made of nails, I went in the other direction and ran to the Archer sculpture by Henry Moore. And when I got to it, I was so amazed. I felt as if I had discovered something for the first time. And I remember thinking, does anyone else know about this? Did I just find something amazing? Okay, thank you very much to all of our participants. Thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you for the doors open. Thank you for the doors open. And thank you for the Commission.